for our personal branding students or our podcasting students, our public relations professionals?
Don't be too long. People won't fill it out. Try to give people enough context, but don't bias them into saying something. So that usually starts with a lot of framing. Like, this is what the survey is about, but we want you to feel comfortable telling us if you hate this idea, if you love this idea, or if you don't care about it at all. And then you have to think about the audience that's actually going to do it. Keep it short, which means come up with a whole lot of ideas and then ruthlessly prioritize the ones that you think are going to get you the best chance to have informative information. The Challenger sales model calls this commercial teaching, which is why I find it really resonant, is like I'm really trying to both understand what their problem is and then have them be surprised by an insight that they have because they're buying my brain at the end of the day.
Tell us about that process as you're asking questions to uncover problems that are objections.
People usually will object if they don't feel like they're being heard. If they don't think that you are listening to them, they'll object early on. And that's sort of a signal that's just like, oh, I'm not being a good thought partner right now because I can't, because partnership means that I know what your thoughts are and I've oversold. So an early objection probably means that you have done something wrong in terms of being able to listen to your client.
Dr. Christine Lusser, welcome to the show. Thank you so much for joining us. Please introduce yourself and tell us a little bit about what you do.
Thanks, Ryan. I am really excited to chat with you. My name is Christine Lusser. I'm a cognitive neuroscientist by training. I've had a kind of windy, twisty career that has gone from basic research on face perception into social psychology and behavioral science, into brand strategy, and now I really work in the education innovation space. But I see this big thread throughout all of that when we think about how to connect with other humans and how to do that effectively in a way that respects what your brain was designed to do. And so I am excited to see where this conversation takes us.
Brand strategy specifically, I know that a lot of our students struggle with that. Can you give us a working definition of how we should approach brand strategy?
Ooh, I can, but I want to push back on you first. So what do you see from students when they originally say like, oh, this is what a brand is? Like, how do they fill in that X?
So it depends on the student and it depends on the level of the student. But a lot of times what they'll say is it's a collection of ideas and values that are representative for a target audience.
Your students are very good. Oftentimes people will tell me it's like the logo. And I'm like, definitely not. But I think we've kind of in pop culture moved beyond that. People understand that it's an idea or a promise or this collection of ideas. And I think that that's a really helpful grounding. But what I always find is that that stays at that 30,000 foot level. And one thing that I have found really helpful when I've talked to students about this is to get even more specific about what it could mean. And I think how it's represented inside of our heads so that then you can use that to design different activities around to really help people articulate the brand strategy for themselves or for a client. So my deeply, deeply nerdy version of this, and we can dig into where it has come from and kind of evolved over time, but a brand isn't something that your brain should know what it is, but our brains are really flexible. So it's built on other machinery that were really important for us to have way back when the only things that existed was us trying to make sense of other people's minds. So people perceive a brand very similar to the way they perceive a human. So it's kind of like the personality of a company. So when you say it's the collection of thoughts and ideas, it's really great. But then you say like, well, how do we perceive other people? And other people seem to be encoded, much like other things in the world, in terms of the semantic network that is activated when you think of that idea. And semantic network is kind of a highfalutin phrase, but if you base it on what those words are, what do you think that means, a semantic network?
I'm thinking of AI because that's top of mind for me, right? So I'm thinking of a neural network, just like with AI systems, that is perceiving reality and making sense of the world.
100%. And the way AI does this is really similar to what our brains seem to do when we encounter a word or a concept. It's activating all of the other words or concepts around it. So if I say the word fire, say the first word that comes to your mind.
Festival. I'm thinking of a train wreck. I don't know why. It's the Fire Festival, that old train wreck. Yeah.
There you go. Okay, that one's terrible. What if I said fire truck?
Very different image in my mind.
Yeah, so I've added only a couple of extra letters, but now you're going in an entirely different direction. And so if I said red, some people would say fire, and some people would say devil, and some people might say luck, right? So it's culturally sensitive what gets activated, and it's contextually sensitive based on your recent history. And so when we think about a brand and we say something like Nike, what do you say?
Swoosh.
Yeah. And so Almost everybody with Nike says that, even though Nike's a Roman god and you could say lots of other things around it. So the way I think about a really strong brand is if you say the name or you show a logo, what is the variability in people's responses to it? And so if you have a really strong, well-recognized brand, it means that the semantic networks in my head are aligned with the semantic networks in other people's heads. Is that helpful to get a little bit more specific?
Consistency. So it's reliability, it's consistency, it's accuracy in comparing responses amongst people. Is that correct?
Yes, and that was a much better way to say that, but it would have been less meandering and less fun.
Way less fun. We want the details. The details are where we get a lot of the fun. So how does this apply to someone who's trying to create a personal brand? Because I think that what you articulated was super clear for these corporations, but what about brand Christine?
What's hilarious about this is if we go back to like your brain being able to understand things, it's almost like we took person perception. I am perceiving Ryan in a certain way. And then we applied that to organizations and corporations or institutions and said, now I'm taking that machinery and I'm using it to understand something that's like bigger and as a company and as a collection of people. And then we called that branding. And then we said, wait, no, personal brands are really where we have to go. And we are now taking this middle thing that's kind of fake and made up and trying to apply it back to people. My take is like your brain was doing personal branding all along. And then it got really creative and was able to abstract it for large organizations or groups of people. And so, really going back to the basics of person perception is how you can be intentional about crafting a personal brand. So I think they're actually quite the same, and we're complicating it by calling it personal branding instead of just person perception.
Like that. There's mechanisms in the brain that help with personal branding. Can you help shed some light on the things that apply directly to helping get our name out?
I mean, I think that there are really, really basic things your brain does. Like it will pay more attention to faces than objects. And so if you are literally the face of your brand, that could be your face standing in for a big organization. Or in personal branding, it's just like what your physical appearance looks like. And that captures people's attention. But then there are all of these things that kind of float in the semantic network around you. And those are the traits that you are really trying to claim for yourself. So you can be really authentic with yourself and say, this is how I want to be perceived. And then there's some noise in terms of the behaviors and activities that you do and the things that you say that people interpret through their own lens. And so you have to do the same sort of personal brand audit that you would do for a big brand, which is say, how do I want to be perceived? How do people perceive me? And then do I adjust my own perception to better match the audience's perception? Or do I change my behavior so that the audience's perception better matches my intended output? So, for going back to a neural level, there are lots of fast judgments that we make about people really quickly. And we often will tie behaviors to inferences about personality. And that's one place where I see people kind of have a disconnect between what they think they're trying to convey and what people are actually perceiving. Is like, what are the inferences that somebody who's seeing my behavior are making, not about the behavior itself, but about what that means as me as a person?
It sounds like there's a whole lot of difference between what some people might be projecting versus who they are. That inauthenticity gap, right? I am this person, this is who I am. How do you advise people to close that gap and create a more authentic personal brand?
It's a great question because I think this is one of the things that we're seeing in the field, which is authenticity has a really high premium on it. We want to create authentic content. We want to be authentic people. And a lot of the research from the social psych world on authenticity had a lot to do with whether people felt authentic themselves. So when you Google PubMed, you're going in and saying authenticity research, social psychology, all the old papers are internal. They're not about how we're perceiving the authenticity of other people. And this sort of started to change weirdly in like 2016, because one of the things people said about Trump was like, I don't like him, but he's really authentic. And that's a weird thing to say. Like, what is the premium on that authenticity that's getting someone maybe not a ton of positive feelings, but at least an acknowledgement that that's valuable? That saying the thing that you mean is worth something. So that started to shift over the last couple of years. I think we'll see more research coming out about the perception of authenticity in others. But if we're thinking about how to actually do something about that, I'd love to kind of push on you to say, what do you see as your personal brand, Ryan? Because I feel like you are a hugely authentic person.
Yeah, well, I'm helpful. I'm the helper. I want people to tell better stories. I want people to create better courses. These are my tenets, right? That's what I'm about. I'm about making sure that I'm helping people to create what they want to create and reach their goals. But enough about me. I want to know about this authenticity thing because this whole idea of vulnerability, for example, sometimes gets turned up to a level that is unhealthy, in my opinion. Like, I'm going to be super vulnerable here, guys. I'm going to share something that's really close and dear to my heart, and then that's like every post, or that's like every form of communication, and it doesn't actually follow up with any actual real showing and walking the talk and having the action behind that original statement. So how can we bridge those gaps in our personal branding to where we are who we say we are and we're following it up with actions that speak louder than words?
I think there's kind of a couple of stages here. We'll call it 3 and see if I have to add more at the end or drop one. But I think the first thing that's really important for establishing a brand, whether it's a company or whether the brand that you're putting out is you is having a high level of self-awareness. So one of the things that humans are not great at is knowing how they feel and think about things and how they appear to other people. But a thing you are really great at is pretending that you do. And so this is where that kind of trajectory of self-learning over time really comes into play. Like, how do I do that work with myself and also with other people giving me honest feedback to really understand who I am, what I care about, and what I want to be perceived as? Like, what are my highest mission, aspiration goals? Yours are to help people. And so I suspect that you kind of knew that all along, but did you get clues from other people? Did you spend a lot of time thinking about it? You went into teaching, so obviously there was something.
Yeah, I started teaching, and you see people grow and you see that you had a direct impact on that growth. And all of a sudden you're hooked because those dopamine centers. And when I used to teach in person, it was the same thing. You'd be the sage on the stage, but you would see them grow as a result. And now with asynchronous teaching, it's a different dichotomy, but it's the same kind of thing. You'll see these portfolios that are just brilliant. And we know that these students are going to have amazing careers as a result of this stepping stone that we helped to craft.
Did you fall into it or did you have an intuition that you wanted to try teaching in the first place?
I had an intuition that I liked teaching, but not teaching college. That was unexpected. I did not, when became a TA, we went through a teaching learning academy, which was all about instructional communication, stealing from educational psychology, psychology, and of course, communication research. And that helped prepare me to be a better TA and teacher in doing these labs where we would actually practice what we were teaching, not just the theory, but the practice. And that's what really got me hooked, was being able to run those kinds of labs.
That's really exciting because I think it mirrors what people stumble into. Whereas people who are like, this is the thing I'm going to do forever, we think that that's the right way to do it. And it probably is for a couple of people. But largely, people are kind of stumbling through life and honing that sense of what feels like you. It's not the same thing for everyone, is a really important first skill to that self awareness. Like, I want to pay attention to what brings me joy. I want to pay attention to the thing I think about in the shower. And that's where you start to get that sense like, oh, this is authentically who I am. The next stage is really being open and honest about what that means for the things that you do. I think I see a lot of young people going into careers because they look cool or because their parents wanted them to, or they think they're going to make a lot of money. And I think that this is causing like huge issues with mental health. And so, really being able to hone that sense of what feels sparkly and then figure out how to be comfortable with that being what is authentically something that makes you happy requires a lot of luck, self insight, and feedback from other people. And so, it's like having the courage to see what makes you excited and then actually follow it.
We have a starting activity with an Ikigai project, basically, where they're trying to figure out what they want to do and how they want to craft a personal brand. But it's not something that it has to be static. It doesn't have to be static. You can take the course, create this great personal brand, and then realize that you need to change direction, because what you're talking about is what lights us up, right? If you're not doing what lights you up, you will not have the success. You will have the burnout, right? So that is related to personal branding in the sense that you will burn out as a creator, right?
I think there's lots of levels to burnout because I think you can burn out doing something you love if you're not respecting your health. But oftentimes, burnout comes from feeling like you're spending a lot of time doing something that doesn't give you energy, right? It's like, this feels inauthentic, or I'm doing it for the likes on social media instead of because I really wanted to write this piece. And so understanding how to kind of get through the hard parts is worth its weight in gold because it's going to set you up to be an authentic person to yourself and also appear authentic to your audience.
And those mechanisms, like the metrics, those are built to hijack our dopamine systems, not just our audience dopamine systems, but creator dopamine systems. So maybe you can give us some insights into how we can take back control of that process too.
That's a really good question. Everyone struggles with this. It's in my Netflix queue. It's about shopping. It's about how we've used behavioral design to make people like buy all of this stuff. And there's a similar story to be told about how we've hijacked dopamine systems to really make people engage with technology products. Have you read Nir Eyal's book called Hooked?
No, tell me.
I think I gave it to somebody. It's somewhere on here. It's old at this point, like back in 2012. And he wrote a pretty accessible book about how we create habit loops and how what you have in the environment is a cue and you see the cue and you do it. And so if you've ever been on your phone, like looking for something real and ended up in Google News or in LinkedIn, or I don't use the other ones, but like Snapchat or Instagram or something like that, and you hadn't intended to go there and you just find yourself being like, "Should I click that?" It's probably a habit. And it's because there's a cue of touching your phone that has put you into this habit loop, or there's something where you have triggered it by seeing the icon, even if you hadn't been looking for it or paying attention. So you need to see a trigger and then you have behavior, and then typically there's a reward associated with it. Like, I learned something about someone is a reward, or somebody liked something I did is a huge reward. And so that creates this habit loop where I have seen something, it has made me do something, I have felt good. So now it's going to reinforce it over time. Breaking it is really hard because these things are meant to take advantage of stuff that makes us feel good. We like validation. We like knowing that other people have heard our ideas or engaged with them or said that something was liked by them. And that's a direct result of us. And so what I usually recommend people do is like figure out how to give yourself that, but not in an automatic way. Have your window where you're going to engage on LinkedIn. Don't open it up every 10 minutes after you have posted a post like I have been doing for the last 20 hours because I really liked the thing I wrote about ChatGPT and I want to see if other people liked it too. So it's really about the choice architecture you give yourself around the experience, because habits get automatic for a reason, and then automaticity is really hard to get out of. So you really have to plan ahead for avoiding those traps if that's important to you to preserve your time, which it should be because attention is our most valuable resource.
And just that framework for reflection on what we are experiencing, just hitting that stop button and thinking, okay, did this piece of content serve me as a consumer? Or did this piece of content serve my brand or my personal brand or my strategy goals as a creator? Can have a really important impact on how we engage with these technologies. I imagine as you're looking at metrics, you might have a really good take on what to look at to know if we're being successful with our brand strategy. How do you attack that problem?
I think that the key thing you have to do is be strategic about what you're trying to accomplish. And so if I am creating content for broad visibility, there's a consistency argument to be made. And it's just I'm putting it out there, yada, yada, yada. That's really good. If I'm doing it to actually attract clients, it matters a little bit because you want to be known that it's out there and maybe there's a lot of likes or a lot of impressions. But it's way better if people are engaging with your content. So like, how can you drop in those moments of saying like, hey, what do you think about this? Or commenting on other people's rather than spending all your time creating your own. So when we think about metrics, for me, business is all about building relationships, and people buy from people that they trust and like. And so you have to go beyond just like how many people put a thumbs up, but how many people are really engaging with your content. And that's going to be probably a function of a couple different things, which is, was your content created in a way that is actually showing your authentic self, talking about a thing you have expertise to talk about? And was it inviting a conversation with other people? And was it pitched to be able to engage them? So I think it's, how do you really develop real thought leadership? This idea that people are going to be content creators as a career is insane. It's like, but about what? Or like, I want to be a thought leader, but like, what are your thoughts? So it needs to be grounded in an area of interest or expertise. And then it needs to be appealing to the audience that you are cultivating, and it needs to invite their participation.
So for our communication professionals who have domain expertise and public relations, and there's so many different areas in public relations or podcasting. And again, there's so many different areas there. And they're saying, I want to be a content creator. I want to be a digital media influencer of some sort. Your advice is to get really specific on that domain expertise and then use that as leverage for sharing value.
Yes. I think one of the challenges is like, how do I become an expert if I don't have any expertise? Which is why I very carefully like it needs to be something that you're interested in or something that you're an expert in. Because if you're just kind of contributing to all of the noise, like there's plenty of digital content. There's going to be so much more as AI starts to like parrot stuff back to us. Really having a unique perspective, I think, is going to be more and more crucial for distinguishing yourself as an individual and distinguishing a brand as something that people resonate with. So like finding your voice is such a cheesy way to say that, but it really is important for you to know what you want to talk about. And if you're thinking about creating content in service of X goal, like sit down and write your keywords. Not saying you have to do search engine optimization for your website, probably should, but like know what the things you want to be associated with are. It goes back to that semantic network. When I say Ryan McPherson, do I think lots of people think about helper? Or do I think lots of people think about podcasts? Do I think lots of people think about teaching? And so if you're crafting those, write about that stuff, write about how you want to be seen. And if you're doing that and it's not resonating with you, go back to your keywords.
I often, especially on LinkedIn, I'll just kind of take things that have happened in my professional life and share those. And I know that's not strategic. I need to be more strategic in how I am crafting the message because my target audience is content creators, course creators, and people who tell stories professionally as a matter of course for their profession. And I know that sharing things from my faculty life may not be serving all those audiences every time. So that's something I'm struggling with, but I'm not the only one. I know that my students struggle with this too.
Right? This is where if you've had a set of passions, interests, or a long career where you've kind of bounced between things and different things resonate, you can be known in different communities for different things. And I think one of the things that's actually really special is I'm going to forget the woman who does this. I will find this and then you can put it in the comments so you can correctly attribute. She calls it a mosaic career. And she talks about how people piece together different aspects of their personality and different aspects of their career. And that actually is much more unique than only focusing on one thing. So on one hand, you really want to know what your niche is, but that niche doesn't have to be only one discipline. It could be the cross between teaching and communications. It could be the cross between neuroscience and branding. It could be the cross between education, innovation, and brain science. Like somewhere in that triangle of interdisciplinary interests is like the thing that makes Ryan Ryan. So I don't think you want to be overly narrow about only finding the one thing that is you, but it's more like a word cloud. And I think that that can go across different audiences, unless you're trying to sell to someone, and then you should be much more intentional.
Absolutely. So for our students who are taking AI and personal branding and podcasting and trying to really craft their brand authentically, and in some cases where it's appropriate, vulnerably, for their audiences to attract either employers or clients, there are mechanisms of the brain that they need to know. They need to know these mechanisms beyond the habit loop system we discussed. What are those mechanisms?
I really don't think we know that much about the brain to like say, for getting employed, this is the mechanism in your brain. But there is some basics of social psychology and behavioral science, which are kind of at a higher level of analysis than neural mechanisms that we can talk about. So one is being really clear about how you build and establish trust with other people, because that's kind of a currency that we trade on when we're looking to create a business relationship, whether that's employment or selling people services. Do you know Francis Frei's trust triangle?
No, tell us about it. When you say trust, I think public relations, because that's We have so much literature on the importance of building and creating credibility and trust in the public relations field. So tell us about this triangle.
So this is a professor at Harvard Business School. Her name's Frances Frei, and it's simplified, which I like for its usability, but it also means like it's a model and all models are wrong. But this one I find useful. And she talks about trust as a triangle between three different things. One is empathy, which I have issues with because I think we're actually really bad at it. We over index on it that it's going to save everything in the world. But the way she describes that aspect of empathy is like, I believe you care about me and my success. So it means like someone has been involved in my thoughts, which I am okay with calling empathy if that's the word she wants to put on it. The next one is what we already talked about, which is that authenticity. So I'm experiencing the real you. And so this is kind of combining I'm me and I really see you. But the third point on that triangle is this idea of logic and that I need to be perceived as somebody who's not just me and not just cares about you, but as somebody who's competent and has good judgment. And so when you put those things together, you end up with this triangle that says, hey, I think that you, Ryan, are you. I trust that you're smart. And I trust that the things that you're going to do are going to take me into consideration. And so she talks about this as a way to build trust very quickly and then kind of uses a diagnosis if trust has been broken. Like, what happened? Did somebody feel like they weren't being treated well? So that's the empathy thing that you have to rebuild. Did somebody feel like you were really inauthentic? And then I have to actually go back and explain to them who I am? Or did somebody think I made a really bad choice and it doesn't matter how much I'm me and how much I care about you? If I'm not confident, I have to repair that side of the boundary.
Ethos, logos, and pathos. This is Aristotle's in artistic proofs. And what she's done beautifully is put those in modern terms, right? Because empathy with the emotion, that pathos, logos with the logic, obviously, and authenticity with the credibility. And that's the cornerstone, it seems like, that you're able to then build empathy and logic with, right? So it's like if you don't have that kind of ethos of credibility, you can't have a genuine empathetic experience or a genuine argumentative experience to say, let's defend. I don't understand where you're coming from. Please defend that idea. I'm trusting that you're doing it authentically. And we're having a conversation built on that trust.
The other two made a lot of sense, but I hadn't put ethos together as authenticity until you said it. And I love that.
Yeah, it's fun and a fun framework to help people wrap their heads around how to interact and create experiences online too.
Yes, that's really interesting. So if I wanted to create an experience, whether it's teaching, whether it's like a brand experience, whether it's the experience of going to my website and trying to understand who I am, really thinking about those as kind of a checklist of like, does this experience really portray who I am in an authentic way? Does it, I guess, you can make it interactive to invite this like empathy aspect. And then logic is like a good experience and it's laid out well. I love that.
Yeah, and empathy in that I understand my user, right? Like empathy in that I'm understanding why they're coming to me to solve the specific problem. And once students have figured out and their personal brand, the problems they're solving and the value that they want to deliver to clients, you can get more empathy with research. What do we need to know about doing good research to create authentic personas for our customers?
Use ChatGPT.
I have my students use ChatGPT. So I'm doing it wrong. I have them, they use it to help them to craft their
Yes,
surveys, for example.
that's totally reasonable.
But give us what they need to know as they craft those surveys. What do they need to know as they do that kind of research? What do they need to know as they have these kinds of one-on-one authentic conversations on Zoom asking about how their personal brand can serve their person, their client?
There's 2 buckets. One is you actually have to know something about experimental design. Like, you can't say, "Do you like purple and blue?" if you wanna know the difference between them. So any question that has an "and" in it is kind of a no-no if you're looking at user experience surveys. And the opposite side of that is, like, don't be overly systematic or robot-like when you talk to people. And this kinda goes back to, like, how much you script things and where you script them, because I see people being really loose with surveys and really structured with interviews when I think it actually should be the opposite way. Like a survey should be really, really remarkably designed well, and you should overcome any challenges of that with like a really big N if you can do research, if you have the resources to do research in that way. And then with a semi-structured interview, you want to start, but if you're really looking for insights from an N of one, like that individual, you want to be able to go in different directions so you can really find out what makes that person tick. And that was what I meant about don't use ChatGPT, because I see some people like make this persona and then talk to me about this product experience. And I'm like, but you just told it what you wanted to hear. So you have to make sure that you're not over prompting either AI or other humans and creating a space where they can be open and honest about it.
I know that students struggle with that survey part. They struggle with crafting quality questions. What are the neuroscientific insights that we need to know in order to craft the right questions? You've already mentioned this idea of don't stack things, don't stack questions. What else do they need to know as they ask questions to create that artificial persona that they can then use to talk to their ideal person?
I think it's going back to intentionality, purpose, and strategy before you even get to like the best practices from experimental design. So this might be more tangible if we start with an example. So give me an example of a survey that you would want to run to help you get insight either about your personal brand or about a project you're working on.
So for our students, what they're doing is they're creating a survey to create the persona. So they want to know the lifestyles. They want to know the listening habits, like what podcasts do they listen to? They want to know what they eat. They want to know where they go. They want to know as much as possible so that they can then craft a persuasive real life persona that they can have in their minds as they create their podcast. And as you know, in podcasting and personal branding, sometimes when we're starting, it's very hard to get a feedback loop. So this is a really important launch point for them before they get the feedback loop of actual human beings giving them feedback. They have to have that avatar.
So when we're creating the avatar, is the idea that I would create a survey and I would send it out to real humans to fill out?
Yes. And obviously, we're limited on time and money to do that as students, but that's the first step. Yes.
When you're thinking about this survey, you already know what kind of podcast you want to do, or it's just blank,
Well,
right?
they've done their ikigai. They've interrogated themselves on their passions, hopefully. They've tried to match that with a real market need, and now they're trying to craft their actual persona with surveys and with live interviews on Zoom.
Yeah. So one of the strategic things about identifying a need and then trying to survey people about it is you actually have to check if they have the need. Otherwise, the surveys that they give you doesn't match who your ideal niche is. And it could be because that niche doesn't actually exist. The bad class version of this is like, I want to teach a class on underwater basket weaving. And it's like, no one needs that. Although I think it would be very funny to actually do that. So thinking about how to find those people is really what the challenge is. And then the question is, what do you have to know about them to make sure that your product or brand is pitched appropriately for them? So I would always focus on, it's so cheesy, but the 4 Ps from marketing. Do you know these?
Yeah. Price, product, place.
Yeah, and promotion. And so it's like, where do people spend time is a huge one because if they're engaging with you, they either have a direct problem that they're only trying to fix when they realize they have that problem. Or if they're trying to consume your content, it's filling a gap, even if it's not filling a need. So maybe I'm listening on my commute. And that's a really good thing to know that people spend X amount of time listening to podcasts in this environment. Another thing to check in is like, how do you typically get this problem solved if I don't exist? So this is kind of the lights out question that businesses ask themselves sometimes. Like, what would my customers do if I didn't exist anymore? And so thinking about that as a way to get at this idea of competition for the mind share that you want to take up, I think is a good tranche of questions. And finally, I think it's nice to have open-ended qualitative responses at the end. Like, what do you want to see? So some of it's demographic to come up with that strategy. Some of it is what are the other things you're doing to get this met to understand what the competition looks like so you can position yourself well. And then finally, it's kind of like, what are your wildest dreams? And so if you already know you want to start a podcast about interior design, you could ask somebody, like, if you could wave a magic wand with a podcast about interior design, like, what would you hope to see on it? And I think that that can help stimulate not just, oh, I'm catering to my audience, but really creative thought on the part of the person making the product or service or podcast to generate co-created
Content that people actually want. I answer this question of the magic wand, and then the content creator or the person who's trying to build a personal brand can use that as one of their core things they want to talk about, one of their pillars, some people call them, in all of their content creation. So after you have the survey and you have the interviews that are well experimentally designed, can you give us some insight onto that first before we move on to the persona creation? Experimental design for surveys, that's a whole class. Can you give us just a little bit for our personal branding students or our podcasting students, our public relations professionals?
Don't be too long people won't fill it out. Try to give people enough context, but don't bias them into saying something. So that usually starts with a lot of framing. Like, this is what the survey is about, but we want you to feel comfortable telling us if you hate this idea, if you love this idea, or if you don't care about it at all. And then you have to think about the audience that's actually going to do it. And if I'm Gallup and I can send out a market research survey and pay people $100, like, sure, they'll sit there and check all the boxes for 30 minutes. But if I'm asking a friend to fill this out or I'm sending it out to like the list of people who live in my dorm, keep it short, which means come up with a whole lot of ideas and then ruthlessly prioritize the ones that you think are going to get you the best chance to have informative information.
I think that that alone will help create a much better foundation for developing a persona. When we're looking at the data and we're interrogating the data from our interviews or from our surveys, and we're trying to build this persona for our personal brand, are the things we should look out for from a neuroscientific perspective.
The big first one that comes to mind is cognitive bias. And so you're going to find the thing that you want to find. And this is where I think AI can actually be really helpful, especially if it's qualitative data. So if you have the transcript of that interview or you have a whole bunch of qualitative responses at the back end of a survey that are short free response things, really having somebody else look at them and saying like, what was your impression about what this said? Or asking AI to synthesize it is going to pay dividends because I will read it and I will pay attention to all of the things that confirm that this is the best idea I've ever had and very quickly be like, oh, that person's probably cranky about something. And so really being objective about qualitative analysis is hard. That's why we call it qualitative, not quantitative. But it can be made easier if you're not the one who's invested in the answer coming out a certain way. So ask other people to read it, work with generative AI to really synthesize. It's good at that.
I love doing that with my teaching evaluations on a side note, right? Like, because it can depersonalize, right? It depersonalizes. And it also, my confirmation bias is put in check by the questions that I'm asking a lot of times.
One of the things that has been old advice that people have given me, but now you can do with ChatGPT, although I am still the personality type that's like, no, I really like, I'll go insane if I don't actually read this, is you have somebody that you trust read all of your teaching evaluations, and then you never actually see them. You just completely trust that this person is being honest with you about it because it takes out both the high spiky points and the really low ones because there's always somebody. So I think that that is a really great connection to the same approach of getting more objective analysis to overcome confirmation bias.
So we have an amazing, well crafted, totally realistic avatar. Now we have to do brand strategy. What do we need to do with brand strategy as it relates to the neuroscientific perspective with this persona?
What do you have people use personas for in your courses?
For crafting podcasts, for crafting public relations, for crafting their personal branding. I think personas are one of my most useful foundational tools for all of these things because it's hard to get real people talking to you whenever you're just starting.
So do you have people create like a generative AI version of the persona that they can talk to?
I'm going to do that now. Yeah, we're going to do that. I love it. Let's do it because they use generative AI to generate the avatar in part, but it's them who say, this is really who I want to talk to. Maybe it's an employer. Maybe it's a client. Maybe they want their own PR agency. Whatever it is, they need to have strategy. They need to have the nuts and bolts of how to actually communicate their messages.
I think the key thing is like start with mission and purpose. Like, what am I trying to accomplish by creating this content or having this conversation or something like that? And having the persona in mind doesn't actually matter for that unless you're saying, oh, I want to take into account my audience's perspective, which is the second part. So know yourself first. Then think about this person as somebody who's receiving that message. And again, this is why personas are important is because they get you out of your own head a little bit, but it's also really prone to let me reshape my persona a little bit so it cares about the things that I think it cares about. This is where I think talking to other people and saying like, oh, do you think this person would think in that way? Other people know how to be more objective about our ideas than we do. There's this really great behavioral science study where they looked at my expectations about behaving well and doing things like buying daffodils that support cancer or donating blood or giving money to charity. And people have overly rosy perceptions of themselves, but they can get very accurate if you say, okay, well, what do you think about the average person? And so the average person doesn't donate that much, or like only 20% of average people really do buy these charity objects. And so being able to say, hey, friend, look at this. Do you think this persona would respond in the same way that I do? Is really valuable because the research shows that we take all of our positive intentions and read them into ourselves, but we don't have positive intentions on behalf of other people. We just have much more objective data about how they'll behave. So the first big one is keep trying to find all of these ways to get outside of your own head. And then think about how the message will land to that person is really kind of an iterative back and forth thing that generative AI can be good at because you can say, hey, how do you actually respond to this if you've prompted it to have this persona? The trick is don't over rely on that. You have to go out and test it with real people to make sure that the things that you are expecting from that hypothesis development stage are actually landing. And this gets into, do you ever talk about p hacking in your classes, or do you know what this is?
Statistically, p hacking?
Yeah.
Yes. Yeah. Tell us though, please.
So p-hacking is a series of practices that people have engaged in all sorts of research for a long time before we realized how bad it was and how much it made us find false positives in the research. So maybe I ran a study and it didn't work. And I was like, oh, well, actually, I want to change the way that my experimenter is interacting with my participant. So I'll just run it again. And that's totally fine to do. But because you've now run it twice or 3 times or 5 times, the chance that anything works just by chance is higher. So when I run it that 5th time and it finally works because I've made all of these tweaks, I don't know if it's because I made the right tweaks or just by chance it has come out this time that this is statistically significant. And I think that makes people really worried about running things over and over again and like iterating and trying, which is good from a statistics standpoint. But that's only if you think about the research process as stopping when you've gotten that. So what you have to do is then replicate. And so if we're going back and forth with these fake personas and we're imagining in our head the way things are going to work, that's not the end of the game. We still have to put it out into the world and collect the real data. So it's like our training set and our testing set. And so when you distinguish between that kind of conceptually, you've got your planning stage, you've got your iteration and your hypothesis development stage, and then you actually have to go out in the world and plan it and test it, take that data in and find out if it resonates.
I love that. In public relations, we have RPI, research, planning, iteration, and then evaluation. So what you're describing is exactly that. And that's so important for our personal branding students or our podcasting students as well. They need to have that critical evaluation of the iteration in order to start the process again, right? It's important to continue to research and continue to
Better habit loop.
have a good loop. Yeah. And in this case, it's a research loop or, a personal branding loop, we might say, right? In the actual neuroscience literature, I know there's a lot written about social proof. And since we're talking about social media specifically, I know social proof is at the top of a lot of people's minds. What are the things related to social proof and how does social proof work for those interested in crafting their personal brand with a neuroscientific perspective?
Social proof is actually a really wonderfully protective thing in olden times, right? Like if you lived in a small group of people and you were out mostly in the wilderness and everybody looked up, you'd be like, oh, damn, okay, that is probably something important over there. And even today, if like everyone's standing on a street corner looking and you watch bystanders go by, you can actually videotape one person staring up and then other people stopping and like looking for the thing that they're looking for. So social proof in terms of like, oh, somebody likes that. I like it too. Somebody's interested in that. I'm interested in it too. In the natural world, super important. In terms of like likes on Facebook, I sound so old. Oh, what do people like things on now? We'll go with LinkedIn. That social media.
It's social media.
So if we're looking for these kind of like little bootstrapped likes, I think that it is still compelling, but inauthentic. And what I mean by that is like, yes, I pay attention to posts. Algorithms pay attention to posts. If they're getting lots of traction, it's going to amplify them. And that creates these feedback loops where it starts off strong and keeps getting stronger. But that's not always strategically important for engagement. It doesn't necessarily convert. And it doesn't for a couple of reasons. If I'm out in the real world, I have to expend energy to like pay attention to what you're paying attention to. If you're stopping and doing something or telling me that something's really great, you've put effort into that and I'm putting effort into listening. And we just have all these things that scroll and they're so fast and it's capitalizing on the same underlying systems of social proof, but it's made them so much more weaker for having meaning that will then be important to you and your business at the end of the day. So I find social proof online to be fascinating and based in something that is real, but it's so watered down that I don't think that it's as useful as thinking about how to create engaging content where people are taking the time to put some friction in. Are people clicking on my free response poll, or are they really taking the time to write a comment? And every time, if people have to expend energy, it will feel more valuable to them and signal more value to other people.
You just hit on one of my favorite lead generation tools. So let's talk
Tell
about
me.
lead generation. The survey is a lead generation tool. That idea of taking something of value that gives some insight into my personality or the way that I can improve my business or I can improve my life in some significant way. That's one example of lead generation. And I imagine it's an example you could have a lot to share about in that you know so much about survey creation. Creating valid, reliable, statistically relevant surveys is, again, an entire course. But what do our personal branding, our public relations, and our podcasters need to know in order to craft the kind of survey that will help them generate leads as opposed to a persona?
This is a mean question because the answers are very contradictory to each other. Good survey design to create insights is different than good survey design to create engagement and use as a branding tool. So, if I want something to be super well designed and I want that to give a sense of who I am and get people interested in that and really excited, it doesn't mean that it won't necessarily follow the principles of good survey design. I think you can still do both, but you think about it in a different way than if you're saying, "Hey, if I ran this with 100 people, would I get the same responses if I ran it with the next 100 people?" Like, I want people to take off the good survey design hat in terms of experimental design and methodology and put on the good survey hat in terms of user design and then see how those things can coexist. And so anytime you make something interesting, you kind of dampen down its replicability. But if that's not what you're looking for, if you're looking for qualitative insights, not replicable p values, that's great. You should be designing really cool surveys. And I think we do this both in user research, but also in education and teaching, where we ask the most boring questions in the entire world. Like, did you enjoy this class? Was your facilitator effective? Do you feel like you learned things? We even don't actually get into what any of those underlying features mean or are. And I think that when we design for people and experiences we would want to have, that's where you get all of these really good halo effects that influence the way people are perceiving your brand. So I would answer your question directly by being like, care less about effective methodology and more about user experience, but make sure it's not violating any really flagrant principles of it.
So let's say that as a creator, I'm looking to put clients into categories, people who are interested in what I'm selling, people who are not interested, people who might be interested later. That survey design experience is incredibly important for accuracy. So we do need a little bit of that statistical or experimental design stuff to filter its way into the fun UX of I want to take this survey and I want to keep taking it when I don't want to take it. What are some things that will help people to be motivated to continue to take the survey or to click on the survey or to go through the entire survey? Because I know that sometimes surveys can produce inaccurate results. I might have false positive, I might have false negatives. How can I eliminate those sorts of things?
You can't ever eliminate those sorts of things because people are messy. I think you can do a couple of things that people don't often think through when they're building things like this. And the first one is think about the peak end rule. So that means what is like the best or worst point of the survey and how does it end? And that's how people are going to reflect on it. It's going to be an integration, like whatever the most intense point was and its endpoint. So I like to end my course creation surveys with a gif of Leonardo DiCaprio cheersing a champagne glass and fireworks in the background. It's not useful. It's just kind of fun. It is useful for getting people to think that they enjoyed taking the survey. It is not useful to my survey design or any of the data that I've collected. So thinking about where that journey peaks or bottoms out and how it ends, super important. The other thing is framing it up front so people know what to expect in terms of timing. Like this takes most people, something like that, telling people how long it will take gives them that kind of persistence as opposed to surveys that have a badly mapped bar that looks like it's not moving at all or it jumps all the way to the end. So, really being intentional about telling people what this experience will entail. And then I think this idea of not just how long it will take, but what the purpose is important to state up front. And this is where you can be really authentic about your like, this is what I'm hoping to accomplish. And this is why I've asked you. People love talking about themselves. And so a survey is a great opportunity to let them do that. But if you don't frame it as like you have been asked to be included in for a particular reason, you're missing an opportunity to get people excited about what they're about to experience. Then you go through the experience. Delight is a weird concept. And I know it became a buzzword to say like delight your customers or inject moments of delight. And I'm like, what does that mean? Like, how do you operationalize that? A well-placed, funny picture in the middle of a survey is like great. I was like, put this here because I thought it was cute. Moving on. Like even something like that gives that sense of your quirky personality if it's aligned with the kind of brand that you want to have. And so oftentimes big companies struggle with this because they don't have a clear idea of who they are. And so if you're representing a company as a PR person, sometimes there's lots of internal debates. Is this polished enough for we want our brand to be seen as? If you're like you and you're building a content creation engine, be you. Put in all of the weird, funny, strange things that make you you, because it will resonate with the people that you want to resonate with. And the final thing that attaches to that is like make it easy for people to tell you no. Like I think that idea of slotting people into different buckets, like don't want your service. If I've asked you, if I've given you a good experience, if I've made you feel like you really want to be admired for taking this and this is why you're in this, now you're in a position where you're like, oh damn, I really want to say yes. But it doesn't mean you can or you're going to. So anything you can do in the survey to take the pressure off, to say, please be completely honest. It's totally okay if this isn't interesting to you. If this isn't interesting, what would be? Giving people that space to disagree instead of just confirm all the biases you've probably built in is really important.
I like that. I like that you're able to simplify. The simplification of saying yes or no, I think makes for an easier survey design and universal design. You and I, for example, work with course creators. What would this look like if we were trying to attract course creators and we're creating the perfect lead generation survey? What are some things we should watch out for? What are some mistakes and pitfalls, and what would it look like?
What are we trying to get course creators to tell us?
We want to see if they're going to be a part of our program,
And we're going to
a
have a
coaching
program
program,
that's going to,
our community, or something like that. We're inventing things here.
yeah. No, I think this is how you should go through thinking about it. So you have to say, this is what my product is trying to do. This is what my audience is.
Let's call it a community, because that's what I run. A course creator community is what I'd like to know about.
Perfect. I love real examples. It's all about application. So we want to send out a survey to people who are course creators and find out at the end of the day if they want to join this community. I would say that the quirky, kind of irreverent vibe probably resonates with what you and I would both create. And so I would probably start out by figuring out what my list is. Like, how am I going to find these people? First, I would start off by telling them why they got invited to take this survey. And I would say, because I admire you and I followed you on LinkedIn and I know that you create really engaging courses, I am considering starting a community and looking for feedback, no pressure to join, but just what would make it valuable for you. Then I would try to get them to tell us something that was really exciting to them about themselves, so that they had a little bit of buy-in and a little bit of goodwill that I really did care. It's not just, tell me about me. It's like, oh, here, we're building that idea of empathy. I want you to tell me about you. And then I would be really intentional about the specific questions I would want to know from them. So, Ryan, what is the purpose in getting this survey? Is it lead generation, or are you trying to do user research?
Or do both at once. I want to ask the magic wand question, but absolutely I want them to be interested in being a part of this learning community that could absolutely level up their teaching.
So, one thing that I find underutilized in qualitative research is react to this situation. So imagine, not that you had a magic wand, but that this community existed. What are the parts that are most exciting to you, and what are the parts that seem the worst? And you could actually probably, depending on the survey tool you're using, have like a rank order thing. And so that's an interactive survey element that doesn't feel like I have to type a whole bunch, and it doesn't feel like I'm just checking a yes or no box. And so imagine there's a community that does these 5 things. Can you rank order them? Or can you allot points in terms of value? And so the more we can switch up the questions, the question types, that I think gives them a sense of who we are and that we're dynamic and engaging. And so that's the next thing I would do is kind of describe the ideal community, but have them move around which parts are useful to them. And then I would probably ask them what they're doing instead of being part of a community right now. And that could be questions like, do you ever find it lonely? To like be a solo course creator or
Obstacles, right? Those obstacles in the customer journey that we're going to help them overcome.
yes. So tell us what the obstacles are. And maybe there's like fancy survey logic I would probably build in that, like, if you gave me 5 obstacles up front, 3, people are bad at coming up with things. Later on, I might show those to you again and say, hey, before you said this, and then I want you to like actually put points on the value of each one being resolved for you. So I think that there's neat ways to leverage all of these interactive aspects that survey tools let you do, but like taking somebody's answer from the beginning and feeding it back to them at the end, that would really convey that sense of like, I'm actually very thoughtful about this experience, which should help you realize that I'm very thoughtful about the way I run my community. And also, please join.
I love it. That's a great lead generation tool. What are some others? What are some other lead generation tools that you love in brand strategy that might also be benefited by a neuroscientific foundation?
I think the building the expertise halo is something that really appeals to me, which is just a content creation strategy. Like, what are your keywords? How do I put stuff out there? But really thinking about how to make that not an obligation for yourself and have it be something that is maybe less frequent but more deep is important. And then taking advantage of your own experiences. I know we talked a little bit about this, like, toxic vulnerability. Not a fan of that. But when something happens that you think other people will find interesting, don't hide that, even if it's not in your content strategy. I just posted something on LinkedIn that I thought was mind-boggling, which was I was having a conversation with ChatGPT about what I looked like. And it gave me this really beautiful rundown of like my systems thinking. And I would illustrate your leadership because it said, I don't know what you look like, but here's a symbolic representation. And then it asked if I wanted it to draw it. And I said yes. And it drew a dude in a suit. And I was so mad. And I was just like, well, I actually had a plan about what I was going to post on durable skills this week, but that can wait. This is very important and it's current. So like find those moments where something was important to you and you think other people should hear about it and embrace them.
Brand strategy is related to content creation strategy.
I think brand strategy is all of the things you do to shape the perception in somebody else's head. And if you're not talking to that person through a content creation strategy, you're doing it in some other way, even if it's just, oh, I have no semantic network about Ryan because I've never heard of him. So shape it intentionally. The only way you can do that is by communicating something. And that could be a content strategy about writing. It could be a content strategy about the imagery you use. It could be the podcast episodes that you're releasing, the product itself. All of that goes into what people are seeing you as. And so any opportunity you can take to get in front of their eyeballs and into their heads is really what you're trying to do.
So other opportunities to get into their eyeballs and heads outside of content creation, lead generation, and survey lead generation. What are some other strategies that you would recommend for our public relations, our podcasters, our bloggers, our personal branding students?
Talking about what you do, like in person to real humans, is kind of compelling. And what it lets you do is not have that filter of like, I've thought too much about this. And so I don't even mean like get up on a stage and talk, which obviously, if you have the opportunity to do, you should embrace and practice and do really well on. But when somebody asks what you do, explain it. And if it's really something that you are passionate about, you'll light up in a way that they'll get excited about it too. And take that as an opportunity to, it's like clinical, but like do a little bit of user research while building that connection with another human. Because even if they're not interested in it, they might be like, oh, that person loved that. And I know this other person who loves it. And that's how you start to get an audience, is by referrals. Goes back to that idea of social proof.
I want an example from you and what you want to be known for. I would
Ooh.
love to hear I want to be known for this.
The tagline that I rely on is that I am really passionate about reshaping learning experiences so that the way people teach aligns with the way that brains learn. There's a whole halo of stuff, but I think that really encompasses it, because anytime you're incorporating new information into your head, you're learning. And so all the stuff we talked about with brand strategy is really a teaching tool. So you're teaching people how you want to be perceived. And you can do that in a way that is like open and friendly to the way the brain is receiving information. One thing that we didn't talk about, but I think ties into this content strategy is space practice. So we know that people learn better through space practice. We know that people are more willing to buy if they have familiarity with a brand. It's the same thing, right? That is like spaced exposure and learning over time. So I think that there are these core principles that are really inherent, whether you're thinking about how to teach or you're thinking about how to communicate. All of that is getting your ideas into somebody else's head. And so that's where I get excited is how do we make sure that people are really helping others learn in service of making their lives better?
So space practice is consistency in branding.
It is. Space practice is tricky because you can get really technical about it. And if you're thinking about flashcards and memorization, you end up with like what's called the forgetting curve. But we have this axis, which is probably mirrored, and now I'm messing it all up. But I know something, my recall is very high, and then it kind of dies off over time as I forget it. And if you test someone and get them to recall right around the time when they probably would have forgotten, it gets high again. And then it falls off again, but this time it falls off slightly less steeply. And so every time you have a recall, the kind of death of that memory gets flatter and flatter and flatter. So people will say, like, you can remember an infinite number of facts forever if you have exactly the right spacing for testing when you're about to forget. And I don't actually know if anybody's looked at this in terms of advertising, but it would be a really neat abstraction to figure out the spacing of how often people need to see the same brand. Because what we see that companies do a lot of is just like, let me show you the same article for the Washington Post 800 times. And they think it's this mere exposure effect, but it's probably much more effective if I don't see it for a while and then it pings and I'm like, oh, that hasn't annoyed me yet. And I still remember it exists.
I love this thread of reasoning of applying how we teach to brand strategy. Let me give you another prompt. Think, feel, do. We want to design experiences where people can engage with that affective, cognitive, and psychomotor, the think, feel, do. How do we design brand experiences around think, feel, do for our ideal clients?
The first is just knowing that that framework exists and using it like a checklist. This is one thing that I see with students all the time and recognize in myself and have experienced so many times in just this conversation where you're like, ethos, pathos, logos. I was like, I knew that one. And knowing something doesn't mean you've learned it because learning means that you know when to pull that tool out of your brain and really use it in the right moment. And it reminds me of some of the old research on like pilots. Do you know what pilots do before they take off?
Have a checklist, of course.
Yeah. Right. And so the reason they do is not because the checklist is better than knowing things. It's that we know lots of things and we still don't remember them at the right moment. And so really developing that brand strategy toolkit about like, what are my checklists that I'm going to use at different moments, I think makes everything much more intentional. And the way I prompt myself to do that, and I've done it a couple times in this conversation, I'm like, wait, what's our purpose here? So mine, whenever I write a document, is like I put at the top of the document what the purpose is, what the audience is, and what the current state is. And then you can kind of do that gap analysis really quickly. But just going back and saying, what are we trying to accomplish with think, feel, do is a great start to using it because there's so many different ways to make people think, make people feel, make people do, but it's not going to happen if you're not being intentional about the framework.
I love that. And the idea of checklists, I think, is also a great lead generation strategy, right? If I can give people a checklist for my domain expertise, that's another lead generation idea,
That's
isn't
super
it?
interesting.
Yeah.
What would it look like?
Well, if we're course creators, it might look like think, feel, do. It might look like ethos, pathos, logos. It might look like the kinds of things you would want to consider and internalize before developing a module on a certain topic.
It would be really neat to think about your content creation strategy kind of as a syllabus. Like, what are all of the tools that I could give people? And then you like, here's the question I would ask. So that gets them interested. And then here's the solution I'm offering, which is this particular toolkit. It's almost like what we do at Minerva when we like tag a learning outcome. It becomes a stand-in word that makes you remember all of the things that are behind it. But I had never thought about creating sort of a series around it. And that would be really neat if you're like, here are the 10 checklists that I know everybody should have. So I'm going to post one every week. And now I don't have to think about what I'm posting for the next 10 weeks because I already knew what was on my syllabus. And now I'm just breaking it up.
What else can apply to brand strategy here after lead generation? Let's say you have your persona, you have your lead generation tools, they're working, and now you have another opportunity for brand strategy. What does that look like?
People are much more confident online than they are capable of being in person. So knowing that this person showed up because of what you did before should give you a little boost of confidence. Some people have like very neutral branding and then they show up and they're overconfident. And so finding that right level of matching is really important. It doesn't have to be incredibly overconfident. It probably shouldn't be underconfident, but it doesn't have to be. It just needs to be consistent. It's about creating that semantic network that is homogenous across the different touch points. So you can't show up and seem totally different than your content because that's where you break that inauthentic bound.
So this is sales. Let's talk about the neuro activity that happens in these kinds of sales conversations around personal branding, because you've done a great job of lead generation. And now we're in a conversation where I want you to understand how you can benefit from what I'm offering.
I think that the brain activity that's happening on the part of the seller and the brain activity that's happening on the part of the listener are two totally different stories. But if they're going well, we actually know this. If people are following the same storyline, your literal neural activity syncs up and the size of your pupils sync up. Like all of these weird interpersonal things happen when you're having a conversation with somebody. And nobody that I know of has studied this in like a selling context. Oh, I bet there's like a neurosales institute. I have to look into this. So the key thing that you're trying to show is that you are somebody who is worth buying something from. And that has to be more of a listening experience than a talking experience. And I think we do this really, really poorly in a lot of situations. We spend all of the time telling people why they should buy from us instead of understanding that what we're there to do is to hear their problem. And if that problem matches what we can offer, it's very easy to sell it. So when you come in and you pitch really hard up front, you've totally missed the opportunity to hypothesis check all the things you think you know going into the call and do that really active discovery that is important for you to shape what you're going to sell and to really make them feel like you've listened to them.
We've talked about the magic wand question. What other kinds of questions would help us to help a client or customer see that they might be a good fit for our program or service or whatever value we're trying to create?
I think what is a challenge from a cognitive bias standpoint is that we already think that they are. Otherwise, we probably wouldn't be talking to them. And they've talked to us, so we think that they think they are. And we immediately go into like, here's the solution. Where do you want it? And when you do that, you are avoiding the mental gymnastics that I actually find quite fun of saying, hey, I'm sure you have some kind of problem. I want to make sure you see why that problem can be solved by this thing. So the first thing you do is you listen a lot. You're like, hey, I really want to understand why you chose to take this call. That's a good way that you could start a conversation. If they need more framing, you say, I know you reached out to me because you expressed interest in joining this community. Tell me why you want to. Or I know you said you have trouble with your website. What are you thinking about changing on it? So starting with those really open-ended questions, start broad funnel. And then as you go through, you can kind of narrow it down to more specifics. And you're constantly looking for ways to get them not necessarily to agree with you, but probably if you're selling something like consulting services, like access to a community, you're looking for moments for them to feel like they've learned something from you. And so, Ryan, if we've gone through this whole call, this whole time, and all I've heard you say is you agree with me, you don't need anything that I'm selling. Like you already know it. And so what I always look for is somebody saying something like, oh, I never thought about it like that, or I'm surprised by it. Because when I'm selling things, I'm selling consulting services, and I want them to appreciate that I'm challenging them in some way. The challenger sales model calls this commercial teaching, which is why I find it really resonant, is like I'm really trying to both understand what their problem is and then have them be surprised by an insight that they have because they're buying my brain at the end of the day.
So, obstacles. What are some obstacles in this process as you have that conversation with that potential client? And please give us an example from when you're having these conversations, because I know you have handled objections effectively, or you still wouldn't be consulting. So, tell us about that process as you're asking questions to uncover problems that are objections.
People usually will object if they don't feel like they're being heard. If they don't think that you are listening to them, they'll object early on. And that's sort of a signal that's just like, oh, I'm not being a good thought partner right now because I can't, because partnership means that I know what your thoughts are and I've oversold. So an early objection probably means that you have done something wrong in terms of being able to listen to your client. There's usually like middle objections around confusion or around trying to put myself in the shoes and saying like, oh, we could never do that here. So, Ryan, if you're telling me that your community requires that I like really actively engage in posts and I'm suddenly like, do people really do that? Do I have time? Then the question is, am I not a good fit? You've communicated well and I'm just not the right client for you. And that's where I see people get a little bit desperate and they're like, oh, well, you don't have to post that much. But if that's really what the expectation is, then you want to say, it's totally okay if this isn't for you. So I always think of middle objections as a decision point to see, am I not being clear about the offering or have I been clear and it's not the right context? And this is one place where what I work on with consulting clients is often big scale innovation projects. And there's times where I've explained something and people are objecting and I'm like, oh, that's not what I meant at all. But there's lots of times where I explain something and they say it back to me and they've heard correctly and they're like, that could never happen at our institution. And then the question is like, okay, but why? So constantly asking the why question helps me figure out where it's
Always done it this way. This can't happen in our institution.
going. We could keep going with it. I could be like, okay, but why has it always been done that way? And I think really helping people do that root cause analysis will help you understand how constrained they are. If you get past those early objections where you're probably not listening well, and those middle objections where you're trying to understand if you've been clear and it's a good fit or not, and then you get to the end and there's a pricing objection, that's where you've actually gotten a very good signal that you've done your job well. But you have to figure out if you've overscoped something, underscoped something. They're only telling you that that's too expensive if they've kind of bought into the solution but don't yet see the value. And so those are the kind of buckets that I put objections into is like, have I not understood a problem? So I haven't scoped something, haven't done good discovery. Have I not clearly communicated our solution? Or are we at a place where we haven't actually quite gotten to you seeing this as a valuable thing? Usually people have money that's fungible. So pricing is sometimes a real constraint, but often it's a perception.
So take us through a brand strategy example for our brand strategist, because that's one of the focuses of this conversation. You have these three buckets of objections. You are a brand strategist trying to overcome those kinds of objections. What are some of the ones that you would see for a brand strategist?
I think for a brand strategist, you want to come into a sales conversation really understanding what people want to accomplish and almost what their strategy is, but you can't over understand that because then you're giving away all of your strategy work in a sales call. So this is a tension I see a lot where in a sales call, when I'm trying to sell someone, I need to be a thought partner up until a point. And so I am actually of the mindset, like, if I can convince you to work with me and there's going to be a big deal on this, I should do as much work in that call as I can to help you be a good thinker. So the first objection might be like, I start talking about semantic networks and you're like, I just need a website. Oh, wait, hold on. Let me better explain to you why this is relevant to your problem. The next set of objections might be me talking to you about what some of the challenges are. And you're telling me, and then I'm saying, okay, well, that means you need to think about X, Y, and Z. And you're like, no, I don't. And then I can investigate whether or not I'm explaining it clearly, or you're just not ready to do that work because you still think that the challenge is the website, not the broader strategy.
This is super common, right? With brand strategy, they'll be like, no, I don't have those problems. I have this problem. Why are you talking about these other problems?
Yep. And I think it's our job as people who help clients learn, right? This is that teaching moment where you take that step back and say, the way I think about websites is that they are a manifestation of the persona that you are trying to convey through a series of actions that we'll call your brand strategy. So your website is one arm of it. But if I ask you a bunch of questions and we get back to the strategy and that feels fuzzy, I see places where I can help you more broadly. And that can be compelling or it can be really off-putting. And you know, Chris is like, don't take bad clients. And I think that sometimes out of desperation, we change our offering or we water it down in a way that's not helpful for clients and it's not helpful for us. So that's where you really have to decide how you're going to scope down and kind of protect your time if you do need this revenue and you need to get started and get your feet wet or how you're going to be more expansive and really push people to consider the bigger picture.
Yeah, and just for our listening audience, we were talking about Chris Do, a personal branding expert and business expert as well. And since you brought him up, what do you like that Chris is doing that is backed up by neuroscience and his personal branding teachings?
I would go back to the person perception. He's so authentic. I find him to be deeply, deeply authentic. I think he builds relationships really well because he gives so much value away for free. Like no one really ever feels sold to in the experiences he creates for people. And he does do a lot of that up front, that there's these sessions you can jump into, and there are all of these different activities you can engage in with his company called The Future, where it feels like I've learned a lot and I hadn't thought about it in that way before. And so, really, what's happening is I feel like he is a great teacher. And that's why I want to engage with him, because those are the kinds of people I want to surround myself with. And I always want to be learning. And so I think that kind of so cheesy to go back to this. The logos and the authenticity and the very authentic Chris brand of empathy are like all aligned to be very trustworthy.
Who else do you see out there doing this right?
It's such a cheesy, like very obvious example. Patagonia does this so well. All of the things that they do are aligned with the brand and the mission that they want to create. Nike has a really strong brand, but sometimes messes up that their activities have to match. There's a great example of BP trying to rebrand themselves from British Petroleum to Beyond Petroleum. And then it was kind of 2010, I want to say, where people were just starting to use social web stuff really actively. So everyone redrew their logo to be like a melting sun or like ducks covered in oil. So like that's an example of a very inconsistent thing. I find Scott Galloway to be kind of compelling in his authenticity. This is a really great example of getting these things
I
right.
like the way that Scott Galloway has championed young male problems and the mental health problems of young
Such
males
a good
specifically.
niche.
Because there were very few champions who were saying, "Hey, we need to have more mentors for young men," right?
It's one of those topics where it's almost like, "No, we don't." Like, I almost have, like, this reaction to it, but then you're like, "Oh, well, if we don't have that, this is the broader systemic effect of it." And I think that that's one of those things that, for me, has really risen above the noise, and so that goes back to this idea, like, who are you and who do you care about and what lights you up? And even if I don't think that that's my passion, I can get really sucked into somebody else's mission if they're very clear about why it's important.
What is one thing that you want to leave our audience with to remember about brand strategy and how to apply neuroscience to brand strategy?
It's a little bit meta, but the fact that you can apply brand strategy to neuroscience and you apply neuroscience to brand strategy is so important, because humans have brains and you're dealing with people at the end of the day. And oftentimes in spreadsheets or content strategies or ideation sessions, we're so much inside of our own heads and our own perception that you want to remember that this is really about the brand that you are putting inside the mind of your consumers. We didn't tell this story, but do you know where the word branding comes from, Brian?
Well, I assume Texas cattle ranchers, right?
Yeah, the word is actually brander, and it means literally to brand, right? Like you are putting a stamp on a cow to distinguish it from all the other cows as your own. And then people started to sign objects and they said, like, this is mine, which means something special. I'm trying to craft an experience. I'm trying to get you to see that this ownership means something. And we often think about branding products, but really what we're doing is we're putting that like hot poker brand in the minds of our consumers. And we want that to be really consistent. So always go back to the idea that this is about what's happening in the brains of the person who's perceiving you. And you need to match that with your projected actions and strategy, because it's all contributing to the way you're being perceived.
So if you're going to stick someone's brain with a hot poker, make sure you're doing it right.
Love that as an endpoint.
Dr. Christine Lucer, where can people find you online if they'd like to connect?
LinkedIn. Think it's just my name, Looser. It's loser with an extra O. It's great.
Thank you so much, Dr. Lucer, for taking the time to share your wisdom and the research and your thoughts on personal branding strategy as it relates to neuroscience. Thank you.
Thank you so much for all the questions. I always enjoy talking with you.